Welcome back. Today we're going to be finishing up our notes on order of operations with part 3. And we'll be talking about specifically involving exponents. Let's go ahead and take a look at our first example. Here we are at example A. We've got negative 21 plus 2 to the 5th power divided by negative 9 plus 13 inside parentheses squared. So we're going to be starting remembering gems. If we remember gems, that's grouping symbols, exponents, and square roots. Then we've got multiplication and division, and finally subtraction and addition. So we're going to start by looking at our grouping symbols. We've got one set of grouping symbols here, this parentheses with negative 9 plus 13. So that's where we're going to start. Although we have exponents and our focus here is exponents, we know we have to do grouping symbols first. So our grouping symbols is negative 9 plus 13. So negative 9 plus 13, I see that they have different signs. So I know that I'm going to be subtracting them and taking the sign of the one with the greater absolute value. So in this case, the one with the absolute value that is greater is the 13, so I know my answer is going to be positive, so I'm going to go ahead and write that down. I'm going to copy everything else down exactly as I see it above, and I'm not going to be changing any of that yet because I'm not doing it, including my division symbol and my parentheses. So 13 and negative 9 are going to give me positive 4. Then I'm going to close my parentheses, and I'm going to bring down my square. All right, so the next thing I see, I have a grouping symbol. Yes, true. I have a 4 inside. There's nothing to do, though. So I'm not going to be doing anything else with grouping symbols. And I've got two exponents. I've got one to the 5th power and one to the 2nd power. I'm going to be doing the one that goes on the left first, because anytime that I've got two things at the same level of gems, I'm going to do the one that comes on the left first. So in this case, it's going to be 2 to the 5th power. So I'm going to copy everything else down, my negative 21. 2 to the 5th power is 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. If I do that, I'm going to get 32. Bring down my division symbol, bring down my 4 that was inside my parentheses, and bring down my squared. So now the next exponent I have to do is the squared. So again, I'm going to copy everything else down, my negative 21 plus 32 divided by, and 4 squared, 4 times 4 is 16. So now I'm down to negative 21 plus 32 divided by 16. So that takes care of all of my exponents. So now I'm on to multiplication and division. I have no multiplication, but I do have division. I have positive 32 divided by 16. So I'm going to copy everything else down, negative 21, and 32 divided by 16 is 2. So I'm going to write plus 2. And now I'm left with just negative 21 plus 2. So I'm going to underline that. That's the thing I'm going to be working on. I notice they have different symbols, and then negative 21 has the one with the greater absolute value, so I know my answer is going to be negative. And I have 21 minus 2 would give me 19, and I know my answer will be negative. And I'm going to circle my answer so I can easily find my answer on either a test or a quiz or a classwork. That brings us to the end of this one, so let's go take a look at the next example. So here we are in example B. In example B, I've got a large division problem. I've got numbers on the top and numbers on the bottom. Again, when I have numbers on the top and numbers on the bottom, I'm going to be doing all of the top first and then all of the bottom and then dividing them at the end. So I've got negative 14 minus 2 times 3 squared. I don't have any grouping symbols here, so I'm going to be just doing the top for right now. And my exponent is 3 squared. That's the one I'm going to be working with. So underline your 3 squared, and 3 squared, 3 times 3 is 9. So I'm going to copy everything else down. So I've got my negative 14, my minus 2, and then 3 times 3 squared, which is 9, all over the square root of 256. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be tempted to see, oh, I have a square root there, so I know that's going to be the next thing in my order of operations because I have no more grouping symbols. And that seems like a good strategy. However, we're going to be remembering that we have to do everything on the top and then everything on the bottom. The giant division symbol in the middle there acts like a grouping symbol. It says, hey, do everything on the top and then everything on the bottom. Then we'll divide them. So we're going to continue along doing things on the top. So the next thing I'm going to do, we've got subtraction and multiplication. So I'm going to be doing my multiplication first. So I'm going to bring down negative 14 minus 2 times 9, which is 18, all over the square root of 256. All right, now I have just one thing left on the top, negative 14 and negative 18. I notice they have the same sign, so I'm going to keep that sign. I know they're going to be negative, and then I'm going to combine them or add them together because they have the same sign. So 14 and 18 is going to give me 32. So I'm going to have negative 32 on the top, all over the square root of 256. All right, we've done everything that we can on the top, so now we're just left with things on the bottom. The one thing that we have to do on the bottom is the square root of 256. So we have to have our perfect squares memorized in order for this to work. So the square root of 256 is 16. So we've got that memorized. Then we're going to have negative 32 all over 16. And now we just have a straight division problem. Negative 32 divided by 16. So negative 32 divided by 16. I know I've got a negative divided by a positive, so my answer is going to be negative. And 16 goes into 32 twice, so I know my answer is going to be negative 2. So again, I'm going to circle my answer so that I can easily find it on a test or a quiz or a classwork. And I'm going to go on to the next example. Here we are at example C, and it looks like I have multiple grouping symbols, multiple exponents, and square roots. So let's go ahead and get started. And noticing that I'm looking for grouping symbols first, I've got two sets of grouping symbols. I've got absolute value and I got parentheses. So when I have two sets of grouping symbols, I'm going to be working inside out. So I'm going to be working with the parentheses first. So that's the thing I'm going to underline since I'll be starting there. I'm going to copy everything else down, my absolute value, my 12, my division symbol, 8 minus 10. They have different signs. One is positive, one is negative. The negative 10 has the greater absolute value, so I know my answer is going to be negative. And then 10 minus 8 is 2, so I know I'm going to end up with negative 2. Bring down my absolute value bar, minus 4 to the 0 power, times the square root of 324. Excellent. All right, I still have stuff to do inside my grouping symbols, so I can't touch those exponents just yet as much as I want to. So I'm going to be doing 12 divided by negative 2 inside my absolute value bar. So I'm going to be underlining that since that's the thing I'm going to be working on. Bring down my absolute value bar, 12 divided by negative 2. So positive divided by a negative gives me a negative, and 12 divided by 2 is 6. Bring down my absolute value bar, minus 4 to the 0 power times the square root of 324. All right, I still have a grouping symbol to work with because I have to know what the absolute value of negative 6 is. So the absolute value of negative 6 is positive 6. Bring down my minus sign, bring down my 4 to the 0 power, bring down my times to the square root of 324. So now I've got exponents and square roots to work with since I have no more grouping symbols. So I have an exponent and a square root. So I'm going to be doing the exponent first since that's the one on the left. So anything to the 0 power is 1. That's that special rule that I have to memorize. So I know I'm going to have 6 minus 1. And then I have to figure out what the square root of 324 is. And I've got to remember that from my chart. The square root of 324 is 18. So I'm going to write that down. And now I'm working with either subtraction or multiplication. Multiplication comes first in GEM, so I'm going to be doing 1 times 18, which I know is going to be 18. So I've got 6 minus 18. So now I've just got an integer problem to do. I've got a positive and a negative. The negative has the greater absolute value in this case, so I know that my answer is going to be negative. So I'm going to be subtracting them. 18 minus 6 is 12, so I'm going to end up with negative 12. Again, circle my answer so it can be easily found. And let's move on to the last example. So here we are at the last example, and we've got a large division problem again. We've got exponents, we've got square roots, we've got absolute value and multiplication. It looks like we have a lot of things to do. So let's go ahead and get started. We're not letting us out easy on this one. So let's go ahead and start on the top, and it looks like I've got grouping symbols up there of absolute value, so that's where I'm going to start. But within absolute value, I've got two square roots to do. So I'm going to do them both. And the square root of 196 I've got to remember, and the square root of 324. So the square root of 196 I know is 14. So again, I'm going to copy down my absolute value bar, copy down the 14 that I just figured out, minus the square root of 324, and the square root of 324 is 18. So I'm going to write that down, write down my absolute value bar, bring down my minus sign, bring down my 5 times 4, all over 13 to the 0 power plus 2 to the first power. All right, so that takes care of a couple of square roots on the top, but I still have that absolute values to deal with. So again, I'm going to work inside that grouping symbol, and I'm going to do 14 minus 18. And I know that they are different signs, and 18 has a greater absolute value, so I know I'm going to be dealing with negative as my answer there. So I'm going to have an absolute value of negative, and then 18 minus 14 is 4, so negative 4. Inside that absolute value bar, minus 5 times 4, bring everything else, over 13 to the 0 power plus 2 to the first power. All right, now I'm going to finish up that grouping symbol. The absolute value of negative 4 is going to be 4, so I'm going to write that down. 4 minus 5 times 4, all over 13 to the 0 power plus 2 to the first power. So now I've got to finish up the top. I've got subtraction and I've got multiplication. I know I'm going to go to the multiplication first, so 5 times 4 is 20, so bring everything down. 4 minus 20. All over 13 to the 0 power plus 2 to the first power. So that leaves me just one thing to do on the top, 4 minus 20. So 4 minus 20 is going to give me, let's see, they both have different signs. One is positive, one is negative. The negative one has the greater absolute value, so I know my answer is going to be negative. And then 20 minus 4 is 16. So I've got negative 16 all over 13 to the 0 power plus 2 to the first power. So I've got everything done with the top, and although that took a lot of steps, I was able to finish the top, so now I need to move on to the bottom. I've got two exponents there. I've got 13 to the 0 power and 2 to the first, so those are those special rules about exponents that I have to remember. So anything to the 0 power I remember is 1, so I'm going to have negative 16 over 1, and anything to the first power is itself. So 2 to the first power is going to be 2, so I'm going to be adding 2. So now I've got 1 plus 2, which is going to end up giving me 3. So I'm going to end up with negative 16 over 3. And it doesn't look like negative 16 is easily divisible by 3. So I know that this is the end. Remember, I'm going to leave my answer as an improper fraction if I am not able to simplify it. If 30 doesn't go into negative 16 evenly, I'm not going to make it a mixed number. I'm not going to turn it into a decimal. If it started as a fraction, I'm going to leave it as a fraction. And since this fraction is an improper fraction, that's okay. The world sometimes has improper fractions in it, and this happens to be one of those times. Just go ahead and make sure that you circle your answer. That brings us to the end of this set of notes. So if you like these notes, go ahead and smack that like button. If you love this video, go ahead and throw us a sub, and we will see you in the next one.